Eddie led me down a hallway beyond the kitchen, stopping at a door with another deadbolt on it. Here he stopped and searched in his pockets until he found his keys. He unlocked the door, opened it, and pulled me into a 2-car garage. I looked around. The garage door was shut, and there was only one tiny window in the rear wall, which, like all the others, had plywood nailed over it. He took me to his car, a beat-up, rusty old Toyota Corolla, and guided me around to the passenger side door, opening it for me like a proper gentleman. I got in and he shut the door. Put on my seatbelt, watching as he went around to the driver's side, wondering if he was really crazy enough to try taking me to some restaurant in town. If he was, then as soon as we got onto the road, I was going to fling open my door, roll out of his car, and take off running, screaming for help. He got into the driver's seat, shut his door, put on his seatbelt, and then just sat there. I waited for him to start the engine and open the garage door. He didn't. Instead, he just pantomimed inserting a key into the ignition, turning the engine, and shifting the gear. I sat there, watching stupefied as he mimicked driving, hands turning an invisible steering wheel, making car sounds, vroom vroom, like a little kid pretending to drive his dad's car, staring straight ahead with an unnerving blank expression. We must have sat there for at least 20 minutes while he pretended to drive, stopping at imaginary stop signs and red lights. Finally, he slowed down and turned the wheel sharply as if pulling into a parking lot. He mimed putting on his brakes and then parked. He glanced at his watch. Whew, we're just in time. I was afraid we were going to be late. What time is it? I asked, genuinely curious. 8:57. Our reservation's at 9. 8:57. It had been less than 8 hours since this nightmare had begun. By now, Tony would have returned from school. He would have noticed my absence and seen the signs of struggle in the house. He would have seen that my door had been kicked in and that my purse was still in the house with my phone in it. He must have already called the police. They were probably looking for me right now. But they wouldn't know where to look. I didn't even know how far Eddie's house was from mine. Unless he had maybe left some evidence behind that they could use to identify him. Was he wearing gloves when he abducted me? I hadn't even noticed at the time. Come on, he was saying as he opened the door. We better hurry. He came around and opened my door for me, escorting me back into his house. Aren't you going to give your keys to the valet? I considered asking sarcastically, then quickly concluded that probably wouldn't be a good idea. He led me back through the kitchen and into the living room. I thought for a moment we were heading back upstairs, but instead he ushered me to a door opposite of the one to the kitchen that I hadn't noticed before. It looked like it was probably his dining room. It had been dressed to resemble a posh restaurant. There was a white linen cloth on the table, and 2 places were set with fine china and silverware. 2 candles were already burning. Elegant violin music was playing through the stereo speakers on the walls. He pulled my chair out for me, again, like a perfect gentleman, and I sat down. He sat across from me, taking a linen napkin and placing it in his lap. I did likewise. He smiled at me. Shall we begin? Sure, I said, trying to sound pleasant and eager. I glanced at my plate. It looks great. That was a lie. My dinner looked like the contents of your basic turkey TV dinner that had been arranged on a plate and then fancied up with some garnish. I guess Eddie wasn't much of a cook. It tasted about as good as it looked, plus it had gone cold in the time I had spent getting ready for our date and the drive over here. But I ate it with forced gusto, pretending to savor every bite in order to please him. Eddie only picked at his food. He watched me with a fixed expression as I ate, an unnerving blank smile on his lips, the flickering candlelight glinting in his wide blue eyes. He didn't say a word, just watched me eat. I could feel his gaze upon me, and it really unsettled me. Minutes passed in silence. I kept waiting for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. In a weird way, it was almost darkly comedic, like being on the worst first date of your life, both of you sitting there awkwardly, waiting for the other to break the ice with some small talk. I finally spoke in order to break the maddening silence. So, you, come here often? It was all I could come up with. He laughed slightly, an almost pleasant sound. Actually, this is my first time here, but I'd heard good things about it. Yeah, me too. I replied, thinking to myself, this is madness. Pure madness. I was sitting here with a violent, delusional maniac who thought we were both TV characters and had kidnapped me, pretending we were enjoying a romantic Valentine's Day dinner at a fancy restaurant. I couldn't think of anything else to say for a while. The uncomfortable silence resumed. You look so lovely in the candlelight, he suddenly said unexpectedly with a tone of utter adoration, taking me by surprise. Why, thank you, Eddie, I replied, trying to sound deeply touched by his compliment. Eddie, I was wondering, why do you like me? I don't like you. I love you, Emily. Okay, well, why do you love me? Because you're the most beautiful girl I ever saw. You're the most beautiful thing I ever saw in my whole pathetic, miserable life. There was a hitch in his voice as he finished, and his face was working as if he was trying to hold back tears. It was an unexpected moment, and for the first time since my ordeal had begun, I felt genuinely moved. He continued, I've loved you from the first time I ever saw you. On TV. He flinched suddenly, as if he had been jabbed with a hot needle and made a sort of choking sound, gritting his teeth. It was as if for a brief second of lucidity, or sanity, or reality, or whatever had intruded upon whatever deluded dream world his mind occupied, and he had to fight it to regain control of his fantasy. In the next second, he resumed, correcting himself. In the hallway at school. I knew you were the girl of my dreams, the only thing I ever truly wanted. I want to be with you forever, Emily. I was at a loss for words. I'd love to tell you that his profession of undying love flattered me in some way, but actually it just creeped me out even further. It was the way stalkers talk about women they obsess over and eventually murder. I suddenly felt very cold and scared. Emily? He asked me, suddenly sounding hesitant and shy. I was wondering... Yes, Eddie? I was scared of whatever he was going to say next. Well, the senior prom's coming up, and I know you're seeing Chad. Chad had been Emily's regular boyfriend on the show, the star quarterback of the school football team. But I wanted to ask if you'd... He couldn't go on, suddenly nervous and reluctant to finish. If I'd go to the prom with you instead? I finished for him. Exactly. I felt my heart sink. Secretly, I had been hoping that this Valentine's Day date had been all he wanted. And that by living out his fantasy, he would be satisfied and might let me go afterwards. I should have known better. This freak wasn't finished with me. He was insane and thought he was living in the world of till death do us part. I sat there looking at him, debating how I should answer. I wanted to turn him down politely and briefly pondered what would be the most diplomatic way to do so. And then I remembered the gun he was still carrying. And how he had slapped me and threatened to disembowel me and do other things. How he had threatened to shove his gun in me and blow my brains out. There was no polite, diplomatic way I could turn him down. He would not take rejection well. I had no choice. I told him, Eddie, I would be honored to go to the prom with you. I figured it would at least buy me more time. Time I could use to formulate an escape plan. Maybe the police would find me beforehand. I hoped. He beamed at me with a smile of immense satisfaction. He took my hand in his. You've made me the happiest man in the world, Emily Glover. Thank you. You're welcome, Eddie. He glanced at his watch. Well, it's getting late. I better get you back home before your dad kills me. He took me back into the garage, and after another 20-minute drive back to my house, he brought me back upstairs to my bedroom. I had a great time tonight, Emily, he told me earnestly. Me too, Eddie. I lied. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, Eddie. I waited for him to close the door and lock me back in, but he stayed there, clearly expecting something more. It hit me. He was expecting a kiss goodnight. I moaned inwardly. Fighting back my repulsion, I leaned up and kissed him on the lips as tenderly as possible, hoping to God a kiss was all he wanted. To my relief, he seemed content. Smiling serenely, he gently shut the door, and I heard him lock it from the other side. I paced the bedroom, feeling a great wave of despair. Tony was probably worried out of his mind about his mom, wondering what had happened to me. who had taken me and what they could be doing to me. By now, my sister Rebecca would have heard the news. She'd be scared too. How long was this psycho gonna hold me prisoner here? Days? Weeks? Months? How long could... I stopped pacing, freezing in my tracks. I could hear something. It sounded like it was coming from the room next door. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening intently. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Voices. Plural. 2 men were speaking in the next room. It sounded like they were arguing. I had thought Eddie lived here alone. Bewildered, I listened, trying to hear what they were saying. Their voices were faint, muffled by the wall, but I could just barely make them out. No, she's not like that. She's nice. The first voice was protesting. I recognized it as Eddie's normal, slightly high-pitched voice. He sounded upset. The other voice responded, "She's just cheap like they all are." This voice was low, sneering, and cruel. I felt my skin crawl. I recognized that voice, too. It was Eddie's other voice. The one he had used when he had flown into a violent rage and attacked me after I insulted him. "You shut up, Ted! You don't know anything about her! Don't tell me to shut up, you pathetic little maggot! I'm the only person in the world who cares about you. If you didn't have me to take care of you, you would have been dead a long time ago, you ungrateful piece of crap. I like Emily, and she likes me. She said she'd go to the prom with me. Why would anyone go to the prom with a loser like you? I'm not a loser. Yes, you are. You're a loser. You always have been. Mother knew it, father knew it, and I know it. I'm going with her, Ted, and you can't stop me." And suddenly, slap. I recoiled, startled. I heard Eddie gasp in pain. He was whimpering, in tears. "It's been a long time. Guess you forgot how that feels. Don't talk to me that way. Ever. I'm your older brother. I own you. Your life is only an extension of mine." Eddie just sobbed. "What? You want to marry her? You want her to have your babies and live happily ever after? That's a pipe dream and you know it. You're never going to have a normal life with anyone except for me. If you want to keep her, that's fine, go ahead. Why let her go to waste? But after you're finished, I'm going to have her like all the others. You understand that, Francis? She's mine. They're all mine." The heck, Francis? I stepped back from the wall, shaken and disturbed. I sat down on my bed. My mind was reeling. What in the world had I just heard? Who was Ted? Who was Francis? And what had Ted meant about having me like all the others? Ugh, what were they planning on doing to me? I was more scared than I had ever been. I lay curled on my side in bed. And eventually, I drifted off to sleep.